The phone was face down on the desk. Zariah Hawthorne had a rule about that. When she was deep in numbers, deep in projections and pitch decks, and the kind of thinking that built companies from scratch, the phone stayed face down. Silence was sacred. Focus was currency. She was 29 years old, running a fintech startup out of a fourth-floor office in downtown Wichita, Kansas. Hawthorne Tech had taken 3 years of her life, 2 sleepless winters, and more of her savings than she liked to count. But it was growing. Slowly, stubbornly, beautifully, it was growing. Her assistant, Tegan Sinclair, had just set a fresh coffee on the corner of her desk without being asked. Tegan always knew. That was why Zariah had hired her. The afternoon light was doing something nice through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Wichita spread out below in flat, amber calm. Zariah was reviewing the latest investor report when the phone buzzed once. She ignored it. It buzzed again. She picked it up, expecting a vendor update. Maybe a callback from Kellen Prescott, her operations lead. Maybe a scheduling conflict. It was her mother. The message was short, the kind of short that takes a long time to read. "We are holidaying in Miami with your sister's family. We drained the joint account, haha." Zariah read it once. Then again. Then a third time. The way you read something when your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are seeing. The joint account. The one she had set up 3 years ago with her parents, Grady and Monroe Hawthorne, when they asked her to help manage the family home. The mortgage, the repairs, the emergency fund. She had been depositing money into it every month. Significant money. Quiet, responsible, no questions asked money. Money she earned building something real. And now it was gone. Drained, not borrowed. Not temporarily used with an awkward explanation to follow. Drained, and announced with laughing emojis. They think this is funny. They genuinely think this is funny. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard for exactly 4 seconds. Then she typed, "Good luck." She set the phone down, face up this time, and stared at the ceiling. Tegan appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay?" Zariah lowered her gaze. She picked up her coffee. She took a slow sip before she answered. "It will be." She said it quietly, not dramatically, not the way people say things in movies before the music swells. She said it the way someone says a fact they've already confirmed. Because what Grady and Monroe Hawthorne did not know, what they could not possibly have accounted for, was that Zariah had already begun preparing for this exact moment. Not because she predicted it, but because she had seen enough. The vacation they were on right now, laughing and posting and draining accounts, it wasn't going to end the way they imagined. Not even close. Zariah's memory was precise. She didn't have the kind of mind that forgot things, not numbers, not dates, not the specific way someone looked when they thought you weren't watching. And 3 months before that text arrived, she had started watching very carefully. It began in March, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday, when she opened the joint account portal out of habit and noticed a charge she didn't recognize. An airline booking, business class, 2 seats. The merchant description was vague, but the amount was not nearly $600, slipping out like water through a crack. She called her father that evening. "Dad, there's a charge on the joint account. Airline seats. Do you know what that is?" Grady Hawthorne had always been a smooth talker. Smooth in the way that felt warm until you realized it was only surface. "Oh, that was for Alara's trip. She needed help with the booking. It's coming back, don't worry about it." It did not come back. The next charge appeared 2 weeks later. A beachfront property rental in South Florida. A 5-night stay. $2,040. Then a high-end boutique Zariah had never heard of. Then a spa. Then a restaurant whose name alone confirmed it was not within the budget of anyone who was genuinely watching their spending. Each time she called. Each time there was an explanation, vague, confident, with just enough irritation attached to suggest she was the one being unreasonable for asking. She stopped calling after the 4th time, not because she believed the excuses, but because she understood that calling was just warning them she was paying attention. Instead, she started saving screenshots. Every transaction, every timestamp, every merchant name. She built a file, quiet and thorough, the way she built everything. Her attorney, Collins Caldwell, a sharp, calm woman who specialized in financial misuse and civil litigation, had been advising her in the background for 6 weeks by the time the vacation text arrived. Collins had told her early on, steady and without drama. Document everything, don't confront them, don't alert them, just document. Zariah had followed that instruction to the letter. But it was the family group chat that changed everything. The chat was something she'd muted long ago, a thread her parents had created, supposedly to keep everyone connected. She almost never looked at it, but one evening in April, a notification slipped through her mute settings, and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from her sister, from Alara Whittaker, who had the perfect husband, Maddox, the curated Instagram feed, the house that always looked like a magazine shoot, and a relationship with their parents that Zariah had long since stopped comparing herself to. The message was addressed to their mother, Monroe. "Don't worry, she won't notice until it's gone." Zariah read it 3 times. "She won't notice. Me, they talked about me. They planned around me, not recklessly, deliberately." This was not a family making a bad decision in a moment of weakness. This was a plan. This was premeditation with laughing emojis attached. Zariah screenshot the message, added it to the file. Then she called Collins. "I have everything," she said. "Then we're ready." Collins replied. The morning after the text, Zariah was at her desk by 7. She hadn't slept much, but not from distress, from focus. There is a kind of energy that comes not from anger but from clarity, when you stop feeling and start seeing, when the noise inside your chest goes quiet and what's left is just the work. She had work to do. The first thing she did was open a new business account under Hawthorne Tech, a protected entity account that her personal information could not be easily linked to without formal legal process. She had been setting the groundwork for this for weeks. It took 40 minutes to finalize. She moved her remaining accessible deposits into it quietly, efficiently, before the business day officially began. The second thing she did was call the bank. She reported the debit card linked to the joint account as potentially compromised. It was a factual report. She had genuine documentation of unauthorized use. The card was flagged for review. Pending charges would require verification. She didn't freeze the whole account. Not yet. Collins had advised against it. A full freeze too early would alert them. A flagged card, on the other hand, that would look like an inconvenience, not a retaliation. It would look like bureaucracy. Let them discover it on their own. Let them stand at a counter in Miami and find out that the money they laughed about is now behind a wall. Collins had already drafted formal notices, not served yet, not filed yet, just ready. Prepared the way a surgeon prepares a tool before the operation. You don't know which instrument you'll need first, but you have all of them. By mid-morning, Tegan knocked on the glass door. "Your 10:30 is confirmed. Also, your dad called the main line, twice." Zariah didn't look up from her screen. "Take a message." Tegan hesitated. Both times he said it was urgent. Zariah looked up then, not sharply, calmly. She held Tegan's gaze for a moment. "Take a message." Tegan nodded and left. She was too professional to ask anything further. Grady Hawthorne calling the office main line twice before noon. Not her personal phone, the office line. Which meant they were somewhere a personal call wasn't working. Which meant the card had already bounced once. Which meant Miami was already starting to crack. Zariah leaned back in her chair and allowed herself exactly one quiet, private moment. Not a smile, not satisfaction, just acknowledgement. The plan was working exactly the way she built it to work. That same afternoon, across the country, Alara Whittaker posted a photo from a resort balcony. The ocean was visible behind her. She was holding a cocktail. She was squinting into the sun with the relaxed expression of someone who has never worried about where money comes from. The caption read, Family First Miami vibes. Zariah saw it. She screenshot it. She added it to the folder. Alara had just handed her another piece of evidence without knowing it. Every post, every caption, every location tag was a timestamp. Proof of presence. Proof of spending. Proof of enjoyment funded by money that was not theirs. Collins was going to love it. Wichita is not a small town in the way rural crossroads are small. It has enough people, enough neighborhoods, enough layered social circles that a person can disappear into ordinary life without much trouble. But it is not so large that a story, the right story, the kind with enough texture and irony, doesn't travel. By the end of that first week, the story was traveling. It started with Alara's social media. She had kept posting the pool, the restaurant, the sunset. Every photo logged a luxury vacation paid for, as her own public comment trail made clear, by a family account. Someone who knew the Hawthornes had started asking questions in the comments. Wasn't that account for the house fund? That's what Monroe said at the church fundraiser. Alara deleted the comment, but not before 3 people had already seen it and shared it in a private neighborhood thread. Zariah had people who kept her informed. She didn't ask them to. She hadn't planted anything. People simply reached out because they knew her, because they respected what she had built, and because the idea that someone would fund a vacation by draining their child's savings, while laughing, was the kind of thing that upset people on a fundamental level. A local community blog picked it up within days. The headline was careful, legally measured. Wichita entrepreneur at center of family financial dispute. Zariah did not comment publicly. Not once. No posts, no statements, no carefully worded responses designed to look casual. Silence was its own kind of statement. Her parents, on the other hand, were not silent. Monroe had left a voicemail that Zariah's phone transcribed automatically. It ran for almost 4 minutes. The tone shifted 5 times, from breezy to defensive, to wounded to accusatory, and finally to something that sounded almost threatening, though Monroe seemed to catch herself before the sentence finished. Grady tried a different approach. He showed up at the office. He was not allowed past the lobby. Tegan intercepted him with polished, unshakable calm. She brought him water. She told him Zariah was in a meeting. She told him Zariah would be in meetings all day. He sat in the lobby for 20 minutes before he left. Tegan relayed it to Zariah without editorializing. Just the facts, delivered with professional neutrality. He left around 11:15. He seemed frustrated. Zariah made a note of the visit. Date, time, duration. Added it to the file. Meanwhile, Alara's online defense was becoming a problem for Alara. She posted a statement, slightly too long, slightly too emotional, insisting that the account had always been shared and that contributions were mutual and that certain family members had a history of exaggerating their generosity. The comments beneath it were not kind. Someone tagged the local blog. Someone else shared Alara's original Miami posts alongside the signed account agreement that Zariah had never posted, but Collins had mentioned in a preliminary filing that had become semi-public record. Alara had handed the internet a story with a clear villain, and she had positioned herself as that villain, not through malice alone, through arrogance, through the belief that optics could be managed after the fact. They couldn't, not now. The power had already shifted. Zariah could feel it, not in the dramatic way of movie moments, but in the quiet, confirmed way of someone watching a calculation resolve. It was resolving. The hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in late May. The Wichita courthouse was older than it looked. All those buildings were built to project permanence, to make whoever stood inside them feel the weight of something larger than themselves. Zariah appreciated that. She had always respected weight. She arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a charcoal blazer and the kind of calm that people spend their whole lives trying to manufacture. Collins Caldwell walked beside her, sharp, composed, carrying a leather case that held everything they needed and nothing they didn't. Grady and Monroe arrived with their own attorney, a man named Hayes Remington, who had a reputation in local legal circles for being loud rather than precise. Ilara sat behind them in the gallery. Maddox Whittaker was not present. Zariah noted the absence without comment. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Reagan Holloway, known in the courthouse for brevity, for not tolerating performance, and for reading documents before hearings rather than during them. Collins opened with the account agreement, a single printed document signed by Grady and Monroe Hawthorne 3 years prior, in which the joint account was formally designated for one purpose: family home maintenance, including mortgage payments, emergency repairs, and a jointly held emergency reserve. The document was clear. There was no language permitting discretionary spending. There was no vacation clause. Then came the transaction history. Collins walked through it with the economy of someone who had prepared this presentation many times and had removed every unnecessary word. The airline charges, the condo rental, the boutique, the restaurants, the spa, 31 individual transactions over 11 weeks, totaling $8,200. Hayes Remington stood to object to framing. Judge Holloway dismissed the objection before he finished the sentence. Then came Ilara's message from the family group chat. "Don't worry, she won't notice until it's gone." The courtroom was quiet enough that Zariah could hear the ventilation system. Grady leaned over to Hayes and whispered something. Hayes shook his head. Zariah watched her father's face during the next 20 minutes the way you watch a weather system, not with fear, but with attention. She wanted to understand the moment he understood, the moment the defense shifted from confident to desperate. It happened when Collins produced the social media screenshots. The resort balcony, the cocktail, the caption, the geotagged location, time-stamped, archived, and matched against the transaction dates from the account. It was complete, it was clean. There were no gaps. Then Ilara stood up. She rose from the gallery bench before her attorney. Hayes had not represented her individually in this proceeding, could stop her. Her voice was sharp and high, and carried the unmistakable sound of someone who had spent years being told she was right. "She has always been jealous. Always. Everything I have, she's wanted. This whole thing is about jealousy, not money." Judge Holloway's gavel came down once, not twice. Once was enough. "Sit down, ma'am." Ilara sat. Zariah did not turn to look at her. She kept her eyes on the judge. Her hands were folded on the table. Her expression did not change. She had promised herself she would not react. Not because reaction was wrong. What she felt was entirely legitimate, but because calm in that room at that moment was more powerful than anything she could have said. Let Ilara's words land in the silence and echo there. Let the room hear them and decide what they meant. Judge Holloway reviewed her notes. The silence stretched. Then she spoke. "The documentation before this court establishes a clear pattern of unauthorized use of restricted funds. The original account agreement is unambiguous. I'm ordering an immediate freeze on all joint assets, repayment of $8,200 within 48 hours, and a formal financial audit of all transactions associated with this account going back 24 months. The gavel came down. It was over in under 2 hours. Zariah walked out of the courthouse into bright Kansas sunlight. Collins walked beside her. "You did everything right," Collins said. Zariah nodded once. "I know." The 48 hours the judge allowed for repayment turned into a conversation about liquidation. Grady and Monroe Hawthorne did not have $8,000 liquid. What they had was a second vehicle, a truck Grady had owned for 6 years, used mostly on weekends, and a small savings account they had not thought about in months. They sold the truck within the week. The savings were drained. The Miami trip had already collapsed before the hearing. The moment the joint account was formally frozen in the legal process, the remaining bookings they had on it were declined. They had checked out of the resort 3 days early. The return drive home from wherever they had relocated within Florida was, by all accounts, silent. Zariah didn't know the details of the drive home. She didn't try to find them out. She wasn't interested in their suffering, not the way people sometimes think revenge is supposed to work, hot and satisfying and immediate. What she was interested in was the correction, the reset, the moment the world reflected back what was true. In Wichita's social circles, the shift was visible and quick. The Hawthornes had held a certain standing for years, the kind built on appearances, on the right church membership, on Monroe's careful management of perception. It had always been fragile, the way things are when they're built on nothing solid underneath. It didn't take much to disassemble it. People stopped calling. Invitations thinned. A charitable committee Monroe had chaired quietly redistributed her responsibilities without explanation. Grady, who had served on the board of a local civic association, stepped down or was nudged toward stepping down. The details were unclear and Zariah did not pursue them. Ilara's situation was harder to watch, and Zariah was honest with herself about that. Ilara had built a life that looked perfect from the outside. The house, the Instagram, the social calendar, the effortless image. But the foundation had always required more money than they actually had, and the Miami trip, funded by stolen savings, had been one attempt among several to maintain an appearance that was already straining. After the hearing, Ilara posted nothing for 3 weeks. Then the posts resumed, but quieter, less curated. The comments were different, fewer, more cautious, with the particular quality of people who weren't sure anymore what the story was. Maddox Whittaker did not file for divorce, but Zariah heard from more than one direction that things between them were not the same. She registered this information and set it aside. It was not her concern. One evening, about a month after the hearing, Porter Donovan, Zariah's head of product development, one of the first people she'd hired, knocked on her office door as she was wrapping up for the day. "Can I say something that's not about the project?" Zariah set down her pen. "Go ahead." Porter leaned against the doorframe, measuring his words. "What you did, the way you handled it, I've been thinking about it a lot. You never lost it, not once. Even when it was obvious you had every right to. I just wanted you to know that it mattered, to us. The whole team, we see who you are." Zariah held his gaze for a moment. "Thank you, Porter." She meant it. She sat alone in the office for another half hour after everyone left. The city below was moving through its evening, people heading home, streetlights coming on, the ordinary and continuous rhythm of a world that did not pause for anyone's family drama. It had been the right call, every step of it, not because it hurt them, but because it protected her. That was the distinction she had carried with her through all of it. Protection, not punishment. Those were different things. She had protected herself. And in doing so, she had let the truth do its own work. 2 years passed. Zariah Hawthorne stood backstage at the Wichita Convention Center, the largest event space in the city, listening to the sound of 300 people taking their seats. The room smelled like coffee and anticipation. Outside, there was a banner she hadn't fully absorbed yet. Hawthorne Tech, statewide expansion announcement. She had a 2-minute warning from the event coordinator, a woman named Fallon Prescott, who moved through event logistics with the same quiet efficiency that Zariah had always believed was the most underrated quality in any field. 2 minutes. Do you need anything? No, thank you, Fallon. Zariah checked her notes once. She had written them herself without a speechwriter. She believed in speaking her own words. 3 years ago, she had been pouring her savings into a joint account, believing it was an act of love. Believing that family meant something mutual. She had built Hawthorne Tech in parallel, quietly, in the early mornings and late evenings, in the spaces between the responsibilities she thought she owed people who took her for granted. The company had survived on discipline and the specific refusal to quit that only comes from having something to prove. After the court ruling, after the financial audit completed and the repayment was confirmed, Zariah had redirected every dollar she had previously been putting into that joint account directly into Hawthorne Tech's expansion fund. The math was not complicated. The intention was not complicated. She had simply stopped giving her resources to people who laughed at her for it. Revenue had tripled in 18 months. They had launched 2 new product lines, a small business expense tracking platform and a credit monitoring integration that had attracted attention from 3 regional banks. The statewide expansion was not theoretical. It was operational. It was funded. It was real. Kellen Prescott had built a logistics team that ran like architecture, every piece placed with precision. Porter Donovan's product development had outpaced every projected timeline. Tegan Sinclair had grown from assistant into operations director without anyone needing to announce the change. She had simply expanded into the role because the role needed expanding, and she was the one there to fill it. These were the people Zariah intended to thank when she walked out on that stage. Not her parents, not her sister. She had no anger left for them. She wanted to be clear with herself about that. Anger required ongoing energy, and she had spent that energy elsewhere, on better things. What she had instead was a clean, finished understanding. They had looked at her and seen an account, a resource, a fund they could access without asking because she would forgive it. She had forgiven too much and called it love. She didn't forgive this, not because she was hard, but because some things should not be forgiven. Some things should be witnessed clearly, documented completely, and then stepped away from, permanently. She had stepped away. Grady and Monroe had sold the family home 18 months after the hearing. They lived in a smaller place now, across town, a rental. Zariah knew this from the public record. She did not know it from contact because there was no contact. She had sent no letter, made no call, extended no olive branch. The door wasn't slammed. It simply wasn't open anymore. Alara still posted occasionally. The content had changed. Less gloss, more careful framing, the kind of shift that happens when someone realizes the audience no longer trusts the performance. Zariah didn't follow her. She hadn't for 2 years. Maddox Whitaker had moved out, then moved back, then moved out again. Zariah had heard this secondhand, without seeking it, and felt nothing in particular about it. Other people's marriages were their own construction. The event coordinator's voice came again from the doorway. "You're on." Zariah walked out to 300 people and a room that felt, in its specific way, like something she had built herself, because she had. The applause started before she reached the podium. She stood at the microphone and looked at the faces, investors, partners, employees, local press. Kellen was in the second row, arms crossed, with the private grin he wore when something exceeded expectations. Tegan was near the back, standing, as she always preferred. Porter was beside her. Zariah took one breath. Then she began. 3 years ago, I started this company because I believed that how we manage money tells us everything about what we actually value. I still believe that. I believe it more now than I did then. Every decision I have made since, about this company, about the people in it, about where I spend my resources and my trust, has come from that belief. You spend your energy on what matters. Everything else you let go. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then the applause came, and it filled the room completely, and Zariah let herself stand in it, not because she needed validation, not because the approval of a crowd had ever been what drove her, but because this was a moment she had earned, through documentation and discipline and the specific courage of staying calm when someone expected you to fall apart. She had not fallen apart. She had prepared. She had waited. She had let the truth arrange itself. And when the moment came, when Grady and Monroe sent that text and pressed send and typed those laughing emojis and believed she would simply absorb it, she had already been ready. The account was drained. So she built something they couldn't drain. Something with her name on it, something permanent. Something that no family group chat, no laughing emoji, no sense of entitlement carried across a lifetime of favoritism could ever touch.